So, like I told you in class, what we're going to do is kind of treat this similar to how you would a lesson in class. We're going to go through major points, major topics, and you take notes exactly as you would, just like we were in class. So today what we're going to take a look at in our first screencast is European society pre-encounter with the New World, and kind of major characteristics that define European culture in a broad context. Just like we did with the Native Americans, and we looked at them in a broad context before we looked at specific geographic regions, like we did yesterday about the Southwest and the Eastern Woodlands. We're going to do the same thing with European culture. So for the Europeans, the first important thing to kind of take a look at is religion and the role that religion plays in European culture. So I want to start off with this quote because I think this gives you some insight into the importance that religion played in European society in the 1400s, 1500s, and all throughout, even into the 1600s. So it says the biggest buildings in a civilization provide valuable information about what that civilization values the most. And if you look at European society during that time period, the biggest buildings by far are going to be churches and cathedrals. So right here you're looking at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which is a huge, tremendous church. And if you go across, if you ever travel to Europe, hopefully you will at some point in your life, you'll go and visit these churches, these Renaissance era churches, and these churches of the 1400s and 1500s, and they're just tremendous structures. And you get an idea that the Europeans put a huge value on religion. And what I want you guys to understand, the reason that this is important is that it gives you the context in which they view the world. So the first important thing to understand is that the Europeans view the world through religious eyes. A lot of times when we look at history, we tend to think that people in any era view the world the way that we view the world. So as Americans, we tend to categorize the world by race. We kind of categorize people by white, black, Asian. That's kind of how we categorize the world as Americans. The important thing to understand is that's not how the Europeans categorize the world. The Europeans categorize the world by religion. And so to them, Christianity is kind of the overarching prism through which they view the entire world. And so that's what we're going to kind of understand here and kind of get a little bit of the background about, because that's very important. When you look at their world, they kind of call their world the world of Christendom, which is a good vocabulary word. And when the Roman Empire collapses, which you're looking at here, like around 400, 450, 500 AD, basically the overarching unifying force within European society is Christianity. And so they don't really view themselves throughout the Middle Ages as necessarily, uh, English or Spanish. I mean, to a certain extent they do, but that overarching unifying factor is the fact that they're all Christians. And they view the outside world, the Muslim world, as their enemies and kind of the other. And so they kind of very much view themselves through a prism of Christianity. Now, when you look at the power that you're going to see within the Christian church during the Middle Ages, the Pope is extremely powerful. And this quote, I think, kind of gives you, again, some insight into how powerful the Pope was during the, 600, 700, 800s, like the late and early Middle Ages. He has tremendous power. He is king of kings, the Pope, and he has power over pretty much everyone in Western Europe. Now, what's going to happen when we get closer to our class, right during that time period of exploration and a little bit after, is you're going to see divisions within the Catholic Church. And so what happens is that you're going to have a major revolution happen in Europe called the Protestant Reformation. And so the person who begins this revolution is actually a monk named Martin Luther. And I'm sure you guys kind of have some recollection of this from global history, but he posts up this 95 Theses, which are his complaints about the Catholic Church. And he's mostly upset about the sale of indulgences that are going on within the Catholic Church, which are selling these slips of paper to get forgiveness for their sins. And he sees this as totally against the true ideals of Christianity. And so he kind of goes out to try and reform the Catholic Church. And what ends up happening is that the Catholic Church does not take his advice, and they excommunicate Martin Luther, and he goes off and forms his own new branch of Christianity. So what you see start to happen in Europe is that Europe is still Christian, but they're divided up as far as geographically and by area what kind of Christianity they have. So what you see here, if you look at the purple parts of the map, like up here in these purple countries, Northern Europe is going to become Protestant, and basically Southern and like the Iberian Peninsula are going to remain Catholic. But this is important to understand that Europe is dividing up off of religious ideas. And so you have different people who are going to branch off. It's not just that all of Northern Europe becomes Lutheran and following the ideas of Martin Luther. You have different leaders. So you're looking at a few of them. Right here is John Calvin, who's going to become very important in our class. He gets followers in different countries. They follow the idea of Calvinism, and it has different names in different countries. So in France, people who are Calvinists are called Huguenots. In England, people who are Calvinists are called Puritans or Pilgrims. And we'll talk about these different groups. Then you also have here King Henry VIII, and he also breaks off and forms his own version of Protestantism, really more for selfish, personal reasons. But that's important because they formed the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England, which is going to become important when we talk about our colonies. Now, what I think is very important to understand, you have all these different branches of Protestantism developing and Christianity's breaking up. The important thing to understand is that each version of Christianity, the people who follow this truly believe that they have the true version of Christianity, and they believe that they're correct. And so it's very different than, say, how a lot of modern Americans view religion. The modern American viewpoint of religion is, I practice my religion, you practice your religion, and that's fine. We can coexist with each other, and it's not a big deal. You have this concept of freedom of religion, and that's a big part of the American ideology. In European society at this time, it's very much my way is correct, your way is wrong. And so what you have happening here is a lot of tension between religious groups in European society. And what you have happening is something we're going to call state-sponsored religion. So there is definitely no separation of church and state in European cultures at the time. So if you live in a Protestant country, there is an official religion of that country. Same thing with Catholic countries. So this is important to understand. Keep all this stuff in mind because it sets the framework for why Americans kind of have a backlash to certain things and why we set up our country the way that we do. So this is very much the culture they come from, where freedom of religion is not tolerated. Government is linked with the religion, the dominant religion of the area. And so what you have happening here, if you look at the maps, you have divisions happening. You have Protestant versus Catholic tension, and that's going to manifest itself in Europe. They're going to fight religious wars. There's going to be tension. There's going to be inquisitions in Catholic countries. There's going to be hunts for witches in Protestant countries. So you have real religious wars and violence taking place within European society. And then it's also going to manifest itself in competition for colonies. So it's very much religiously based. Protestant countries versus Catholic countries, trying to gain more colonies in the New World. Yes, it's also nation-state based, England versus France, each country trying to get the best land and get the most colonies. But it also kind of has a religious element to it, which I think is important to understand. And religion overall, I think, is very important to understand because it sets the context for how the Europeans interpret the New World and how they view the Native Americans. It's not through racial eyes, it's through religious eyes when they meet the natives for the first time. So keep that in mind, it's very important. All right, the next big thing that kind of shapes the Europeans pre-exploration and when they get here, that's kind of, they're bringing this mindset to the New World, is the legacy of, we're going to call the legacy of feudalism. So by the 1400s and 1500s, Europe has gone through the commercial revolution. They're trading extensively with other people around the world. So they're no longer isolated in this feudal system. But they still kind of have some of the remnants of feudalism, and definitely the mindset of feudalism is still within European society. So that means really two things. The first thing that it means is their ideas of social classes. In European society, there is still this idea of being upper class simply by birth. So you can gain a title, you can inherit a title, you can be the Duke of York, um, you can have these different titles that basically give you upper class status simply by what family you're born into. And so this is a European mindset that they have. So you have the nobility, the upper class, and you have the peasants. And these different groups had different rights. So although feudalism is declining and it's gone in most of European society, the remnants of that ideology is still there. And so you have to understand that when you understand uh, the early American colonists, and then also the backlash that a lot of early American and Spanish colonists have to European society, that rejection of this whole idea of upper class by birth and having certain rights just because you're upper class, and peasants have different rights. So I think that's the other important thing as far as rights within European society. There are different sets of rights based off of your class within European society. So the nobility, they have the right to bear arms, to learn how to fight. They have the right to own land and own property. They have the right to go hunting. The peasants, the common people within European society, don't have any of those rights. And so if you look at the foundation of American rights, colonial rights, you see a fundamental rejection of that, right? We offer those rights to everybody. We offer the right to bear arms, the ability to fight. Hunting is a part of American society. The right to own land, individual land ownership is very important. And so when we talked about the Native Americans and how they don't have a concept of individual land ownership, one of the huge draws for the colonial world, and then even later on for coming to early American society, is the fact that individual land ownership is available to large amounts of people, not just to people with a noble title, not to somebody who's just a duke or has a sir in front of their name. Anybody can kind of go out and own property, and this is huge in a feudal society that doesn't exist, and you don't have that privilege. And so for Europeans, the availability of land, and that's how they see the Americas. Remember, we talked about this. They view the Americas as this vast, untapped wilderness where the land is not being used. Being able to use the land and get and own land is a tremendous, tremendous draw to come to the Americas, whether it's the Spanish New World or it's the British New World or the French New World. Resources, land, these are huge aspects of drawing people to come to the New World. Now, beyond kind of feudalism, but it kind of connects into it, is the Europeans' ideas of proper gender roles. So again, this breaks down along social class lines. In the upper class, men were expected to be soldiers, to fight. Women were expected basically uh, to stay home and raise the children. And in the lower classes, men were expected to farm, and women were expected to play the same role, kind of stay home, take care of the children, and take care of the household. Now, they have very distinct gender roles. So I brought this up in class. European society, a good vocabulary word is patriarchal for European society. They are very strong patriarchal societies where it's a male-dominated society, meaning men have the leadership roles. They basically are in charge of the society almost 100%. And so this is important to understand again when we talk about their interaction with the natives, because you know they have fundamental different ideas about what can and cannot be done within society. And so it's just a different way of viewing the world. And remember, we talked about in class that it's not that one view is right and one view is wrong, it's that they just have different interpretations and they don't really understand one another. All right, I'll see you guys in class.